Imagine, imagine you are sitting in your living room, right? And someone you love is having a severe medical crisis. I mean, they are in agonizing pain.
Oh, man. Yeah, that is a terrifying scenario.
Right. So you call for help, the ambulance arrives, and the paramedics walk through your front door. But instead of, loading your loved one onto a stretcher, they just cross their arms.
They just stand there.
Yeah. They tell you they are legally forbidden from starting the vehicle's engine until 3 specific stars become visible in the night sky.
Wow.
Oh.
Which sounds completely absurd to us.
It's totally absurd, but you have to sit there watching the person you love suffer, just staring out the window, waiting for a literal legal timer to zero out so you can get them to a doctor without being arrested.
That's just a devastating picture.
It really is. Well, welcome to Reform Thinking. I'm your host, and as always, I'm joined by a resident theologian for today's discussion.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
So today we are taking a deep dive into 2 incredibly detailed theological treatises. We are looking at a very specific, historically dense moment in the Gospel of Mark.
Right, chapter 1, verses 32 through 34.
Spot on. And our mission today, for you, the listener, is to strip away the modern cultural assumptions we so often bring to the text.
Which we all do, right? We all bring our baggage.
Oh, absolutely. We live in a society that, loves to frame Jesus of Nazareth as this sort of therapeutic life coach.
Yeah.
Someone who just exists to boost our self-esteem.
Yeah, to give us a bit of middle-class ease. And the treatises we are looking at today argue that this therapeutic framing completely neuters the historical and theological reality of the text.
It totally waters it down.
It does. When you treat the incarnate Son of God as a divine functional utility, someone who just exists to maximize your personal comfort, you miss the sheer scale of what is happening in Galilee.
And so set the scene for us. What is the actual scale here?
Well, we are looking at a moment where the raw, unyielding authority of the Creator confronts the sheer, unvarnished misery of a fallen world.
And this massive collision happens right at the doorway of Simon Peter's house in Capernaum.
Right there on the front porch.
It's such an intense historical scene. I want you, the listener, to picture the physical reality of this moment. It is twilight in Capernaum.
The sun is just going down.
Yeah. The streets are narrow, they are packed with these basalt stone houses, filled with the dust of the day and the smell of the nearby sea, and a tidal wave of human agony is pressing against this one house.
And the texts point out that this isn't just some historical curiosity. It's not just a nice story about a local healer.
Right.
This is a cosmic conflict localized on one single front porch. You have the second person of the Trinity, veiled in human flesh, standing face to face with the structural ruins of his original creation.
He is looking at the physical decay and the spiritual hostility that has just ravaged humanity since the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, but to fully grasp why this massive crowd gathered at this specific moment, on this specific evening, we have to look at the clock.
The chronological trigger.
Right. We have to understand the intense legal restrictions of first-century Galilee.
Because Mark gives us a very precise time marker. He says, evening having arrived, and when the sun set.
It's not an accident that he mentions the sun setting.
No, the people of Capernaum waited until sundown to bring their sick and their demon-oppressed neighbors to Jesus. And why the delay? Because it was the Sabbath.
Yeah, and that detail is a massive theological anchor for the entire narrative. Is the lens through which we have to view the whole event.
Let's unpack that. Why is the Sabbath such a big deal here?
Well, the Sabbath, in its original design under the Mosaic covenant, was meant to be a sweet sign of God's grace. It was a day of rest.
A relief from labor?
Exactly. I mean, yes, spot on. It pointed the people of Israel to the eternal redemptive rest they would find in him. But by the time we reached the first century, things had changed.
The religious authorities had gotten their hands on it?
Right. They had twisted that provision into an intolerable engine of physical and spiritual bondage.
Let's talk about what that bondage actually looked like on the ground, because we throw the word legalism around a lot today.
We do, yeah. Usually to describe someone who is maybe just a bit too strict about minor rules.
Right, like someone being picky about what you wear, what music you listen to. But what did first century legalism look like for a family living in Capernaum? How bad was it?
It was suffocating. Under the oral traditions of the Pharisees, which were later written down and codified in the Mishnah, specifically in tractates like Shabbat, there was this intricate bureaucratic network of extra-biblical regulations.
Endless rules.
Endless. The Pharisees had taken the original command to rest and added 39 primary categories of forbidden labor. and then hundreds of subcategories beneath those.
So what did that mean for a sick person?
It meant carrying a sick person on a stretcher, or walking more than a designated Sabbath day's journey, or even seeking non-emergency medical treatment before sundown was considered a heinous violation of the fourth commandment.
Oh, wow. So if you had a chronic illness or if your kid was having a severe fever, you were trapped. You literally could not seek help.
You were stuck.
And that brings us back to that ambulance analogy from the start of the show. The people of Capernaum were sitting in their homes, watching the sky with absolute desperation.
Because the rabbinic law stated that the Sabbath did not officially end until 3 medium-sized stars became visible in the evening sky.
Wait, 3 medium-sized stars?
Yeah, those 3 stars were the legal marker that officially terminated the restrictions.
So they were just staring out their windows, waiting for the sky to get dark enough.
Only then could they legally carry their paralyzed, diseased, and demonized loved ones through the streets. If they moved too early, they faced the condemnatory eyes of the Pharisaic guards.
Social ostracization, or worse. The psychological toll of that must have been staggering.
Absolutely. You have a town full of desperate, suffering people, and the religious system designed to shepherd them is instead forcing them to watch the sky, waiting for a celestial timer to zero out before they can beg for mercy.
I'm stuck on something here, though. A genuine question about the mechanics of the narrative. Why did Jesus play along?
What do you mean?
Well, we know from the text earlier in Mark chapter 1 that Jesus healed a man in the synagogue on this very same Sabbath day. He clearly wasn't bound by their false legalism.
That's a great point. He healed earlier that day.
Right, so why is he suddenly waiting in Peter's house? Why not just walk through the streets of Capernaum at 2 in the afternoon and heal everyone right where they lay? Why make them sit there in agony waiting for 3 stars to appear?
That is a brilliant question to raise, and the treatises address this tension directly. We do see Christ often forcing the issue with the Pharisees on the Sabbath. He frequently defies their man-made rules to demonstrate his lordship.
Right, he picks grain, he heals hands.
Yeah, but in this specific instance, his delay, or rather, his decision to remain in the house and let them come to him, exposes the absolute pastoral tragedy of rabbinic Judaism.
How so?
The barrier keeping these suffering people away from the healer wasn't Christ's unwillingness to act.
The barrier was the system itself.
Precisely. The heavy legalistic hand of human tradition was the obstacle. The religious leaders had built a fence so high that the people were terrified to cross it, even for their own survival.
Even when the Son of God was sitting just down the street.
Right. By letting the scene play out this way, the narrative highlights the cruelty of the system the people were trapped in. The very day designed to give them rest was the thing prolonging their torture.
It paints a devastating picture of a world trapped between physical decay, spiritual terror, and cold, unyielding legalism. So the stars finally appear, the legal boundaries expire, and the text says the whole city was gathered at the door.
The physical boundaries of the town could no longer contain the suffering.
But what specifically were they bringing to Peter's front porch? The sources we are analyzing draw a very sharp line between 2 distinct types of misery.
Yes, Mark uses very careful, deliberate phrasing here. He says the crowds brought all those having it badly, and they also brought the demonized ones.
Let's pause on that phrase, having it badly, because that sounds a bit clunky in English.
It does sound awkward in English, but the Greek text is incredibly precise. The phrase is kakos ekantos.
Okay, kakos ekantos. What does that imply?
The treatises point out that this was a classical medical idiom used in the ancient world for acute disease. Mark explicitly separates this biological illness from spiritual possession.
He pairs the medical pathology right alongside to keepinus daimonizominus, the demonized ones.
Right. 2 separate categories.
This distinction is fascinating to me because it pushes back against a very common assumption. You hear this argument all the time today, right? People assume the biblical writers were just, primitive.
Yeah, the chronological snobbery argument.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. The argument goes that first century people didn't understand biology, germ theory, neurology. So anytime they saw epilepsy or severe mental illness, they just labeled it a demon.
The treatises vigorously challenge that assumption. Modern scholars often claim that the ancient worldview was entirely superstitious, spiritualizing every physical ailment.
Just blaming ghosts for everything.
Right. But the text of Mark, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, destroys that assumption. Mark, and by extension the early church, clearly knew the difference between a biological sickness and a supernatural entity.
And the way Jesus interacts with these two categories proves it. The sources highlight that he treats them with distinct administrative actions.
Correct. For physical pathology, Christ restructures biological tissue. He cures the sick. He is knitting cells back together, repairing organs, clearing out viruses or bacteria.
He fixes the biology.
Yeah. But for demonic possession, he enacts a direct authoritative eviction of a personal spiritual entity. He speaks to them, he commands them.
Because you don't command a fever to pack its bags and leave the premises in a personal sense.
No, but you do command an invading entity.
It's like buying an old house, right? And you discover you have two completely separate problems. On one hand, you have a rotting foundation. The wood is decaying, the joists are failing, the structure is crumbling.
Right, structural damage.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you have a highly aggressive, hostile squatter living in the attic.
Oh, man.
You cannot fix the hostile squatter with a hammer and some new lumber.
No, you can't.
And you cannot evict a rotting foundation by handing it a legal notice. They require entirely different solutions because they are entirely different problems.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. Physical pathology requires biological reconstruction. Demonic possession requires authoritative legal eviction. And Jesus provides both simultaneously on that front porch.
But I want to push back on how we apply this today because the sources bring up something that might confuse a modern listener. The treatises note an unprecedented spike in demonic activity during the 1st century, specifically clustering around Christ's public ministry.
Yes, there was a massive concentration of activity right there and then.
So if that level of overt possession was historically unique to that era, should we view physical illness and spiritual warfare entirely differently today? Are they just two unrelated tragedies we have to deal with, or is there a common root here?
Well, to understand their connection, the treatises synthesize this passage with the broader biblical theology of the fall of Adam. Both sickness and demonic torment are invasive anomalies.
They aren't supposed to be here.
No, neither of them are natural components of the original pristine creation. God did not create a world with cancer cells, and he did not create a world where fallen angels hijack human faculties.
Both are tragic consequences of the fall. Let's unpack that term, the fall of Adam, specifically regarding how it affects biology, because the sources use the phrase federal rebellion in Adam.
It's a weighty theological concept.
Yeah, so what does that mean in plain English for someone who might not be familiar with that specific term?
Federal rebellion refers to the concept of federal headship. In this theological framework, Adam acted as the legal representative, the federal head of the entire human race.
Like an ambassador.
Yes, like a representative who acts on behalf of a nation. When he rebelled against God in the garden, he didn't just make a bad personal choice. He plunged his entire posterity and the physical creation itself into ruin.
The covenant was broken.
Exactly. As a result, biology itself was subjected to futility. Sickness is a structural ruin of biology due to that representative rebellion. Our bodies decay because creation is operating under a curse.
So a virus is literally a biological manifestation of a broken covenant.
That is an accurate way to state it. Sickness is passive decay resulting from the curse. Demonic oppression, on the other hand, is active, personal hostility from fallen angels.
The demons are actively exploiting the brokenness of the world.
Right. They are two different fronts in the same cosmic war. Sickness is the structural decay, and the demons are the enemy combatants taking advantage of the ruins.
And Jesus steps onto that front porch in Capernaum as the cosmic conqueror to wage war on both fronts simultaneously.
He is.
He is reversing the effects of the fall right there in the street, proving that the curse of sin will not have the final say in human history.
He is demonstrating absolute dominion over the consequences of the rebellion.
Okay, so having identified these two separate fronts, the biological and the spiritual, we need to look at how the King of Kings actually executes his authority over the physical devastation of disease.
Because his method is just as significant as the result.
Right. The text says Jesus healed, many having it badly with various diseases. The sources point out that he executed this with quiet, absolute authority. And the way he does this stands in massive contrast to the pagan world around him.
The methodology of Christ's healing is striking, especially when you contrast it with the pagan exorcists and healers of the ancient world.
What were they doing?
Well, if you look at the magical papyri from the 1st century, healing and exorcism were incredibly theatrical.
Give us a picture of a pagan exorcist at work. What did that look like?
It involved elaborate rituals. They would use incantations, burning roots, specific smells, and magical rings.
Magical rings.
Yeah, the historian Josephus actually writes about a man named Eleazar who supposedly drew out a demon through a person's nostrils using a ring that had a root prescribed by King Solomon under the seal.
Through their nostrils. Oh, man. That is so strange.
It was all about having the right formula, the right theatrical buildup, and manipulating spiritual forces through secret knowledge.
So it was essentially performance, a magic show.
A highly choreographed performance. But with Jesus, there is none of that. There is no theatrical buildup. He does not require psychological preparation from the crowd.
He doesn't hype them up.
No. And he doesn't rely on the recipient's personal level of faith in this instance. The text shows him acting with a simple touch, a word, or a silent exertion of his divine will.
He systematically dismantles various biological pathologies with the ease of a craftsman fixing his own handiwork.
Which is such a massive contrast to the charlatans of his day.
And the treatises take a very hard line here against modern trends, too. They use this historical reality to push back on what we see today. They critique modern prosperity gospel movements and pragmatism.
Oh, heavily. The sources frame this as a warning against treating Jesus as a functional utility designed to maximize earthly comfort.
Because modern pragmatic theology kind of reduces Jesus to a cosmic vending machine, doesn't it?
It really does. The idea is if you put in the right amount of faith or the right words, out pops your physical healing or your financial breakthrough.
But the narrative flow of Mark's gospel completely rejects that.
Completely. Christ did not heal to secure a popular following or to validate a prosperity doctrine. In fact, if we look just one verse past our text, early the next morning, Jesus leaves the demanding crowds of Capernaum to go preach in other towns.
He walks away from the biggest revival meeting of his career.
He deliberately abandons a massive, enthusiastic crowd. He refuses to let his mission be hijacked by the physical, therapeutic demands of the populace.
Because his primary mission was to proclaim the authoritative word of God, not to act as the permanent medical director of Galilee.
Right.
It makes me think of the difference between like a loud, flashy game show host and a quiet benefactor. The game show host throws cash at an audience, hyping them up, getting the cameras to zoom in on the crying faces, right?
Yeah, trying to get wild applause to boost the network ratings.
It's all about the spectacle. The crowd is just there to stroke the host's ego, but a quiet benefactor walks into a hospital, looks at the crushing medical debt of every single patient on the ward, and pays it off with a single signature at the front desk.
And then quietly leaves through the back door.
Exactly. Before anyone can even organize a round of applause, Jesus is not performing for the crowd. He is executing sovereign mercy.
That distinction is vital for understanding the text. He does not allow his identity as the Son of God to be reduced to a public healer or a political deliverer. The miracles are massive in scope, but they remain subordinate to the primary mission.
But, this raises a very challenging question. If you are listening to this and you are dealing with an illness right now, this thought has likely crossed your mind. The sources address this directly.
Yeah, the question of why it stopped.
Right. If Jesus had the ability to heal everyone instantly, and the sources state that his miracles were a pledge of the final resurrection, why did he allow the miracles to cease? The treatises take a strict cessationist view. Let's unpack that term first. What is the cessationist view?
The cessationist perspective, synthesized from the text, argues that the spectacular apostolic miracles like healing entire crowds with a word or raising the dead were unique authentications of the messianic era.
There were special signs for that specific time.
Right. They were the foundational cornerstones used to authenticate the apostles in the inception of the new covenant. This view argues that these specific miraculous gifts were never intended to be a permanent, ongoing pattern for all of church history.
So if they weren't permanent, why did they stop? Why wouldn't a church in the 21st century need those same physical validations right now?
The argument is that once the apostolic era concluded and the canon of Scripture, the New Testament, was completed, the church was left with something far greater and entirely sufficient: the final written Word of God.
So the physical cures in Capernaum were a temporary, localized down payment on a much larger transaction.
Yes.
It's like the scaffolding used to build a massive stone cathedral. You need the scaffolding to put the stones in place to establish the structure. But once the cathedral is fully built, you take the scaffolding away, the building stands on its own. You don't keep the scaffolding up forever. It has served its purpose.
That is a very helpful way to visualize the cessationist argument. Furthermore, The sources reference the prophet Isaiah, specifically Isaiah chapter 53, to explain the ultimate purpose of the healings.
How does Isaiah tie into this?
Well, on Calvary, Jesus didn't just soothe the symptoms of the curse. He absorbed the full, undiluted wrath of God against covenant rebellion. He bore the root cause of the sickness.
Which means the healing at the door in Capernaum was pointing forward to the ultimate healing at the cross.
It was a localized demonstration of a cosmic victory. He is demonstrating that he is the master of all biological structures, exercising the same creative command that first breathed life into the dust of the earth.
And the sources use the word monergistic to describe this action. Let's define monergistic for the listener, because that is a heavy theological term.
It is. Monergistic comes from two Greek words meaning one work or one energy. It means a one-sided divine action, where God does not rely on human cooperation. In this context, Jesus is not collaborating with the sick people to achieve their healing. He isn't asking them to generate a certain amount of faith to activate his strength.
He acts unilaterally, he commands the biology, and the biology submits.
Period.
So the biological diseases submitted silently, the fevers broke, the blind eyes opened, the paralyzed limbs gained strength. But the spiritual entities at the door, they were not silent.
No, they were incredibly loud.
They had a terrifying supernatural intellect, and they wanted to talk.
Which leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of this entire narrative, the messianic secret and the muzzling of hell.
The text says Jesus cast out many demons and was not permitting the demons to speak because they knew him. The grammar Mark uses here really demands our attention.
What is happening in the Greek syntax?
Mark uses the imperfect tense for the verb of restraint. In Greek, the imperfect tense indicates continuous, ongoing action in the past.
So it wasn't just a one-time be quiet. No, it wasn't a one-time command. It is a continuous, unyielding refusal of permission. Jesus is repeatedly, actively shutting their mouths as they attempt to speak.
And the reason given is a causal clause. Because they knew him, they recognized him.
Immediately. These fallen angels recognized the young dusty rabbi from Nazareth as the second person of the Trinity, clothed in human flesh.
They had completely orthodox theology. I mean, they knew his identity, his origin, and his authority.
They possessed entirely accurate information about who he was. But Jesus enacts a strict imperial muzzle. He will not allow the father of lies to act as his herald.
It's almost like a political campaign, right?
I mean,
Well, imagine you are running for office. You have a clear platform, a message you want to deliver to the public. Suddenly, your most bitter, hateful, corrupt rival grabs a microphone on national television and starts screaming that you are the absolute best candidate, that everyone should follow you.
you wouldn't thank them for the free press.
No. You would rip the microphone out of their hands instantly. Why? Because their endorsement poisons your message. When a corrupt source validates you, it twists the public's perception of who you are. You do not want the worst person in the world telling people you are their favorite candidate.
That illustrates the danger perfectly. The danger of truth sourced from hell is severe. The demons had factual accuracy, but zero conversion. They recognized his might, but they despised his lordship.
So if Jesus accepted their public testimony, it would visually and audibly link his holy mission to unclean spirits.
Right.
But I have to ask, if the ultimate goal of his public ministry was to prove to Israel that he was the Son of God, why reject factually accurate testimony, regardless of the source? If a demon yells, "You are the Holy One of God," isn't that just free advertising for the truth? Why is it so dangerous for the crowd to hear that right now?
To understand the danger, we have to look at the socio-political climate of Galilee in the first century. The region was a powder keg.
Ready to blow?
Exactly. It was occupied by the Roman Empire, and the Jewish people were suffering under heavy taxation and brutal military occupation. There were numerous insurgent groups, like the Zealots, constantly trying to incite a violent rebellion against Rome.
So the crowd is basically waiting for a spark. They are desperate for a military leader.
Highly desperate. If the demons were allowed to broadcast his divine identity prematurely, it would have sparked a massive, carnally minded political uprising among the Galilean crowds.
They would have tried to force him into a military role.
The people wanted a conqueror on a white horse to crush Rome. If they heard the spiritual world declaring him the ultimate king, they would have attempted to crown him by force and march on Jerusalem.
But that wasn't the plan.
No. The treatises highlight what Reformed theology calls the covenant of redemption.
Let's unpack that. What is the covenant of redemption?
It is the theological concept of an eternal agreement between the persons of the Trinity before time began.
A divine agreement.
Right. The Father appointed the Son to be the substitute for fallen humanity. The Son agreed to take on flesh and suffer the penalty for sin, and the Spirit agreed to apply that redemption. This divine decree required Christ to proceed to the cross as a silent, suffering lamb, not as a political revolutionary.
So Jesus is dictating the timeline of his own revelation. He controls how he will be known.
He will be known through his substitutionary death in his empty tomb, not through the shrieks of hell. A merely triumphant miracle worker could be embraced for entirely selfish reasons.
By continuously silencing the demons, Jesus guards the true sacrificial nature of his redemptive mission.
Precisely.
That is a staggering thought. He had to silence the truth from the wrong source so that the crowd wouldn't try to crown him king before he could go to the cross and actually save them from their sins. He refuses to bypass the suffering of the cross for the sake of immediate popular acclaim.
It reveals his absolute dedication to the will of the Father. The timeline is fixed, and hell will not be permitted to accelerate or derail it.
Now, this absolute dominion over both the physical curse and the forces of hell wasn't just a theological abstraction for the people who first read Mark's gospel. It had intense life-or-death significance.
Because of who Mark was writing for.
Right, we have to ask, who was Mark writing this for? The treatises point out that Mark wrote this gospel for the early Christian community residing in the heart of imperial Rome.
The historical context of that original audience is grim. They were living under the tyrannical, state-sponsored persecution of Caesar Nero.
What did that persecution actually look like for a believer living in Rome?
It was horrific. After the Great Fire of Rome, Nero blamed the Christian community to deflect suspicion from himself. To declare Jesus as Lord in that environment was an act of high treason against the state.
It was a death sentence.
A brutal one. Roman Christians were facing public execution in the most terrible ways imaginable. The historian Tacitus records that they were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by wild dogs in the arena, or they were crucified, or they were covered in pitch and set on fire to illuminate Nero's gardens at night.
So imagine you are a believer in Rome. You are terrified. You are hiding in the cramped quarters of the Suburra, or meeting secretly in the catacombs. You are watching your friends and family members being dragged away by the Praetorian Guard.
And someone hands you a copy of Mark's Gospel.
Yes. You desperately need to know if the beast of Rome, Caesar, is the highest authority in the universe, or if the Christ you are dying for is actually on the throne.
And when they unroll that parchment and read Mark chapter 1, verses 32 through 34, they find their answer. They read about Jesus muzzling ancient demonic spirits with a quiet command.
And those demons were not just abstract concepts to the Roman?
No, the early church understood that the pagan gods of the Roman pantheon, Jupiter, Mars, Apollo, were actually demonic entities deceiving the nations.
So the demons that the Roman pagans feared and worshipped, the very spiritual forces empowering the empire that was currently slaughtering Christians, were utterly helpless before the Galilean king.
They couldn't even speak without his permission.
This proved to the persecuted church that the Roman Empire was just a temporary puppet regime subject to Christ's sovereign decree. It's like staring down a terrifying, abusive supervisor at work who holds your livelihood in their hands. You are trembling in their office, terrified of what they can do to you.
But then you find out your older brother actually owns the entire global corporation.
Right. The supervisor might yell, they might threaten, but their authority is entirely an illusion. It is completely superseded by a higher, unshakable claim.
The comfort derived from that realization is massive. If Jesus can command the molecules of diseased bodies to knit back together, and if he can silence the hosts of hell with a single verb, then he is the undisputed master of life, death, and the unseen world.
That knowledge allowed those early Christians to face martyrdom in the arena with complete steadfastness. They knew the emperor was not in charge. The healer of Capernaum was.
It gave them the courage to face the lions.
But I want to address you, the listener, directly with a hard question, because we have to bring this into our own lives right now. We are not facing Nero's lions, but many of us are facing our own terrifying realities.
We all face the curse in different ways.
If Christ has this total, absolute dominion over disease, if he is the master of biology, why do believers still get sick? How does this text offer comfort to someone listening right now who is walking through the dark valley of chronic disease or watching a loved one waste away in a hospital bed?
That is the most pressing pastoral question we can ask when looking at a text about miraculous healing. The treatises, synthesizing this text with the broader Reformed view of sovereign providence, offer a robust, if difficult, answer.
What is that answer?
Sickness is not a sign of God's abandonment. It is not a sign that you lack faith or that you haven't prayed the right formula.
So how does providence interact with a tumor or an autoimmune disease?
Under the theology of providence, not a single molecule of illness acts apart from God's command. God, in his ordinary providence, makes use of means, yet is free to work without, above, and against them at his pleasure.
Meaning he governs everything.
This means he governs all creatures, actions, and things from the greatest to the least.
So the disease is not operating outside of his jurisdiction. It hasn't slipped past his notice.
Never. He uses physical suffering to mortify our self-reliance and refine our holiness. The comfort found in the Capernaum narrative isn't a guarantee that you will receive a miraculous cure today.
And what is the comfort?
The comfort is knowing that your disease is completely muzzled by the king, just like the demons were. He holds the illness on a leash. He is using it in his infinite wisdom to prepare you for a physical resurrection where the curse will be eradicated forever.
He is not an absent observer watching you suffer from a distance. He is the sovereign architect of your sanctification, even working through the brokenness of your biology.
When we look at Christ's might at Peter's door, we see a Savior who has absolute authority over our disease. We can rest in his providence, knowing that our physical suffering is achieving for us an eternal weight of glory, as the Apostle Paul later writes.
The king who stood on that porch is the same king who governs the progression of your illness, and he is steering it toward your ultimate good.
He really is.
Let's pull all of this together. We have covered a massive scope of theology stemming from just a single evening in a Galilean fishing village. We watched the sun go down on the crushing legalism of the Sabbath, exposing the cruelty of a religious system that prioritized rules over mercy.
We saw the desperate townspeople drag the misery of the curse to Simon Peter's front door.
We examine the sharp medical and spiritual distinction between physical disease and demonic possession, recognizing them as two separate fronts in the exact same war resulting from the fall.
And we observed the staggering difference between temporary pragmatic relief and the raw, one-sided authority of the Son of God. He is the sovereign king who commands biology to knit back together and forces hell to shut its mouth.
He refuses the cheap, toxic endorsement of demons, and he walks away from the superficial applause of the crowds, all while marching steadily toward the cross to absorb the root cause of all this misery. He is not a life coach offering tips for a better Monday. He is the cosmic conqueror reversing the curse of Eden.
He is the Lord of the Sabbath, the master of creation, and the sole architect of redemption.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. Think back to that agonizing scene in Galilee we started with. In Capernaum, the people waited for the sun to go down on their own legalistic efforts, their own religious systems, before they finally dragged their brokenness to the door of Christ. They had to reach the absolute end of their own options.
They waited until the timer zeroed out on their own ability to manage the crisis. They were entirely stripped of self-sufficiency.
So ask yourself, when the sun finally sets on your own physical health, your own mental resilience, and your own self-righteousness, when all your managed care and incremental steps fail, who is standing at the threshold of your life? Is it a therapist offering coping mechanisms, or is it the King of Glory holding the keys to death and hell? Something to consider as you look at the doorway. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.